Hi everybody on Fortis Therapy and Training Facebook page. Nice to see you all. I hope you're all having a good week. We haven't had any more surprises, I guess, from a lockdown perspective. You know, that's it now, we're in it for a while. So we're here tonight with our second week of the self-care sessions. Last week, thank you to everyone who kind of engaged and chatted and asked questions. It was fantastic, and we've had lots of people get in touch since as well, just to say that it was really helpful. So that's lovely, because that's the purpose of doing them. So if you can share the live with your friends and on your timelines and in any groups you're in, that would be great. Just so we want to reach as many people as possible, really, because we know there's a lot of people struggling at the moment, and mental health services are under a lot of strain. So we just want to kind of keep the conversation going, especially at this time of year, which would be tough in a general year, never mind with one that we're in at the minute. So I'm really pleased to be invited, pleased to be joined tonight, by Katie Buffey from Salt and Silver Jewellery. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
Thanks for coming to talk to us. So we were just saying about how to introduce you, really, because you've got lots of different kind of roles, haven't you, in different hats. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to you. Do you want to just tell everybody a bit about you and maybe a bit about the jewellery as well would be great.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Katie. I'm local, raised in Lincolnshire, and I went to school in Caister. I've always had some difficulties, like some differences. It wasn't something that all really didn't come to light until I think I was 23. Do you know, I meant to check this before I came on. I can't remember, and I really should. But I think I was about 23 when I was actually diagnosed. So I have autism, Asperger specifically, ASD, and I have Tourette's, which we've known about for longer, since I was little. That was quite obvious. And surprisingly for me, although not surprisingly for other people that know me, ADHD. So that was something that all came in with an adult diagnosis. So I left school, I went to sixth form, got my A-levels, good grades, went to university down south, and then I left after 9 months. Total breakdown, absolutely hated it, which we think now was because of the undiagnosed Asperger, so I didn't know why I was struggling with things.
Right.
So came back home, crashed at my parents again, and became kind of their problem again. And they completely supported me through, that really difficult time. And then I was actually supposed to go back to university as a mature student to go and study physical geography, which is something that I absolutely love. And then just by chance, my partner at the time, who is still my partner now, he bought me some jewellery making tools one Christmas, for our first Christmas together, to help me with my anxiety. And so after that,
it was born.
Yeah, it got busy and busier. And then someone was like, "You're going to have to register it as a business now." So I was like, "Oh, okay." And with that, Salt and Silver became Salt and Silver. So I worked from home for just over a year. And then Sam kicked me out because I was too noisy and making too much mess. So just looked for a workshop. The workshop had a shop underneath it. Well, I had a space underneath it for a shop. The shop was born. We opened the shop. And with that, that's where my photography, that's where the side of that kind of grew, because I had to learn quite quickly to obviously make my products look good to sell. And I absolutely fell in love with the photography. That for me was a huge help with my anxiety. I got totally obsessed and into that over the years. So yeah, that's kind of how the two developed, one from another, and both from anxiety and kind of needing to be creative.
It's very interesting, isn't it? There's really positive things that come off the back of all of that difficulty, really. It's almost like you've found your way with the creativity side of it.
Definitely.
Based on your anxiety, which is incredible, really, isn't it?
I absolutely wing it. I don't ever plan.
I'm with you.
Like
daily.
Yeah, absolutely. Just completely stumble through, and have been so fortunate. I am driven and determined, and what have you with it as well, and it's something that I love. But yeah, it's very much all stemmed from trying to take care of myself. And I think a lot of people think that when they have these kind of difficulties, that it's like the end of everything and all sorts, but actually it's just the start of something new. Like when I went to university, it was to be a secondary school PE teacher. I haven't been for a run for like 3 years. Like,
turns out that wasn't quite right.
Yeah, my life completely, changed. But I think you always end up where you need to be. It might not be where you think you were heading or where you thought you wanted to go. But that's something that I firmly believe, that you will get to where you need to be, and to somewhere that's good for you if you do what feels good.
And it's trusting your instincts with that, isn't it? Because I'm with you on that. I know for me, what comes out of my own adversity and where I am now, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't have had that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's something that could never have ever been on the cards, ever. Like, it's not something you'd even contemplate. And I think that's something that's quite important for people to remember as well. When they're struggling, they might not be able to think of what's coming next. It often just happens. And I think that there's power in that, and to have the confidence that, it does take a lot, when you're in a really dark situation and you can't see the next day, but to kind of hold that confidence that something will come. And I think that's a way that I also deal with my anxiety, is now trying not to let it kind of eat you alive, because it's so easy to do that. And I think if you're doing anything that you love, whether you love going, biking and cycling, or whether you like gymnastics or sewing or crocheting, then
crochet, we can't do crocheting. I actually, in lockdown, I can't remember which number lockdown, but I bought myself a crocheting kit, and it is literally still sitting there staring at me. It's the most expensive thing I think I've ever bought myself. And it's literally just a ball of crochet wool with a hook, and I'm like, no idea.
We bought a huge, well, I didn't realise it was this big. We bought some clay. So I was like, yeah, great, I'm really creative. I could make some nice ceramic bowls. And oh my goodness, it was the biggest bag of clay ever. We got it out once, and the plant pot that I made, it's so big and heavy and so chunky. It's not a plant pot, it's like a brick. And I was like, this is not for me. This is not for me. I'm going to
go back to jewellery.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, no, I'll stay. I know what I'm good at. Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that because you've kind of, you talked about your diagnoses there, which kind of sound like they were late, I know there'll be parents watching this where they kind of say, my child is struggling, and we see it. We work in a lot of schools and with a lot of children at Fortis, and we often will pick up on what's happening and work with the family to get a diagnosis if that's going to be helpful. Sometimes I don't want it, and just want to kind of go with understanding what's happening. But did you kind of go through schooling kind of knowing that there was something that was different to everybody else?
Yeah, so I always describe it as, and until I knew what the diagnosis was, didn't realise that other people who also have ASD describe it as the same thing, which I just felt like I was not meant to be here. I just felt like I'd been dropped on this planet. And I remember, especially like in sixth form, as we'd got older, as people had kind of matured and their interests had changed in a way, I remember sitting there and watching everybody, and it sounds creepy, it sounds weird, it wasn't like at all. I was just observing.
Like some strange stalker in the corner.
But it was like I was having to learn, I was having to watch how everyone else behaved to see how I should be interacting with other people. And I remember thinking, like, I don't think no one else seems to be doing that. Everyone just seems to get it. They can just talk really easily. Like, they know, they have all these things in common.
Social norms, isn't it? Knowing the social norms.
And it's like, and I would, at the time, I don't think I realised that I was having to, oh goodness, I'm so sorry. I literally turned that on silent and it's still going off. Sorry about that. And I used to have to just watch what people were doing so that I could learn what was the right thing to do. Say, for example, I'd done something or said something that I thought was funny or sarcastic. No, like it just did not go down.
That did not land.
No, I was like, oh, okay. That did not come out how it was meant to in my head. And there were so many things like that I just kind of had to just change from watching kind of other people. And that's when I really realised, I was like, I am really different from these people. And I have a twin sister, so she literally like dragged me through secondary school. Like, I think I'd have been rocking in a corner of the library if I didn't have her, honestly. Like, she got me through that. So I think in that way I was quite lucky, because a lot of people who are on the spectrum, they have a really hard time at school.
Very lonely potentially, isn't it? It's very quite isolating.
Yeah, and I mean, I felt really lonely, but I don't think anyone else would have really known that, because I had my sister who was able to kind of help me through, and so I was able to cover over quite a lot of things. But I always felt quite distant and like I was looking over things, if you like. Yeah, and that was something that was quite tricky, really. And I think, I was going to say, it kind of either makes you or breaks you, but I think it does both. I think I felt like at my worst times then, I just felt like how do I go on? Like, how do I fix this? Because we didn't know, I didn't have a diagnosis, and no teachers ever picked up on it. And I think because I was always really sporty at school, generally seen to be more outgoing because I was, you know, so much into sports and things like that. Whereas actually, and also then having my sister as well, did a load of good because it got me through it. But we were lumped together because we were twins, and she's so outgoing and really loud. Like you hear her before you see her. Amazing. But I think that our school reports, you know, our names would be mixed up on our school reports, and so I think teachers would just never have picked up on it, because I think of that situation, which sometimes I think helps, because I think, how would I have dealt with a diagnosis as a teenage girl, a diagnosis of autism, which is typically a boy's diagnosis, which it isn't, but that's how
it's seen.
It's like the lost girls that I've, you know, done so much research and things on. Yeah, and so I think that's again something that I can't change. I wasn't diagnosed at that young age. Sometimes I feel a bit like, well, could I have actually dealt with things and not suffered as much if I'd have had that diagnosis? But again, there's absolutely nothing that I can do about that or change. But now I just try to speak about it openly as much as I can, so that other people can get an earlier diagnosis, you know, to kind of maybe make that connection. Yeah, and I get lots of questions on social media about it from parents of children who are struggling, who they think they might be on the spectrum, of people who are my age and even older who are like, oh my God, like I think you've just described me. And it's like this revelation.
Sometimes that revelation, I think, can be so helpful, because realizing actually there is, oh, this completely describes me. But like we were saying before we came on the live, is that, but it's very different for each individual person. So it's almost like having traits of certain things, but they'll be at different levels for each person depending on how it's manifested.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people come to me and they'll say like, I've got anxiety, but I also have to have this routine and what have you. Now I think I might be on the spectrum, and I'm kind of like, okay, I'm not here to say if you do or if you don't. So, but I'm happy to speak about what their struggles are and to speak about mine, and then to maybe suggest a pathway for them to go if they would like to, you know, to get a diagnosis. But with ASD, there's quite a specific set of problems. You basically have to meet, you can't just meet one kind of, everyone will meet one of those kind of boxes to tick, if you like. You have to meet all of them. And often people are like, oh, everyone's a little bit autistic. I'm like, oh my gosh, no, they're not.
What does it even mean?
Like, what does that mean? Yeah, and I think sometimes people only ever say things like that as from a good place. They really do. They want to try and make people feel better about it. But in doing so, you can sometimes make people feel worse, because I think it's like, oh, I feel even less understood, you know.
It minimizes the person, doesn't it? And actually the daily, I was going to say struggles, but the daily differences, I think.
But it is daily struggles. And I think, I mean, some things are hilarious, like my inability to understand sarcasm and to try and be sarcastic. They land me in some really bad situations sometimes, but they also land me in some really, like, some comical situations. And so, you know, things are funny, and my parents, you know, they make jokes out of certain things, which is, you know, that's fine, that's nice. They've known me, you know, this whole time, but they also know that it is hard sometimes, and there's no escaping that. It is really hard. It's lonely, it's dark sometimes, and I think that's where people who think they are but don't have a diagnosis sometimes get a bit lost and struggle, because they're kind of in no man's land. It's like, I'm really struggling, I know I'm different, but how? And if I don't know what it is, then how do I know kind of how to, you know, the actions to make to change things?
There's a question very much along the lines of what you're talking about, someone asking Would you say it's important to go to your doctor if you feel your child maybe has autism, or would we not find much support there?
Oh, crikey. So
Yeah.
I
It's a
went
bit
to
loaded.
yeah, I mean, I went to my GP about it actually, because so at the point at which we decided to get a diagnosis was when it had just been being passed off as depression and stuff. It's like, oh, I was like, I'm not a depressed person, if you like. I was like, I'm not just innately sad. I'm struggling with all these things, therefore I am sad. And it never quite fit, and there were so many things that just didn't really add up. And so I went back, because actually I was quite scared to go back about my depression after I'd had Oscar. I have a 6-year-old boy, and with the anxiety, I didn't want to go to the doctors about depression, because in my headspace then I was like, he's going to be taken off me. Do you know, that doesn't happen. To anyone who's thinking that, go to your GP. Like, it does not happen. That is in the dark anxiety space. They're there to help you. They really are.
Absolutely, completely.
And so from the depression side of it, was then kind of more than happy to go. But it was my sister actually who messaged me, and she was like, I think you might be on the have autism. I think you might be on the spectrum. And I was just like, no way. I was just like, no. And she was just like, take this test. So I did, and it came out like a really high score. I was like, great, I haven't. She's like, no, that means like
yes, that's the opposite.
Like, you're really high up there. And so then I took like 3 more, because I was like, no, this is not. And it came out that it was looking like I would be. So at that point I was like, right, I'm going to go to the GP, and I'm just going to say, this is what I think is going on. Please, can you help me? And it was the worst experience of my life, because the GP basically said, like, yeah, that may be the case, but she's like, you're going to be waiting like 2 or 3 years on the NHS waiting list to get a diagnosis. And I was just like, I won't be here in 2 or 3 years. I was like, I cannot go another day. And I was like, it was a whole situation in that doctor's room. It was bad.
But it's all crashing in at the same time, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Someone's saying you can't get help yet, and
yeah,
I've come for help today. Yeah.
But at least I knew where I was with that situation, and I've actually been speaking to a few families who have children who they think are on the spectrum. Some have gone to a GP and they've actually been supported really, really well. Some have gone to their child's school, and some of them have been supported well through school, and some haven't. Unfortunately, and I always want to try and show that there is hope there, and there is. So I would say, do go to your GP and do speak to the child's school or nursery, absolutely. However, in this country, there is a serious lack of help for diagnosing children that are on the spectrum, especially if they are not disruptive at school. Schools at the moment, and as have done probably for the last decade increasingly, become carers. They have to feed children. There's so many problems that are going on that lands on the doorstep of teachers that they often just don't and can't pick up these things. So for me, I ended up going private for a diagnosis, which was not something that we could pay for at the time. We were very fortunate that my parents, they kind of stepped in. They're like, look, you need to get this sorted. We will pay for it. And for me, that was the most fortunate position I could have been in, because most people, they're not in that position. It would take them then, or their parents, a year, 2 years, what have you, to save up to be able to do that anyway. Fortunately, children's services for this kind of thing privately are generally a bit more accessible than adult services. Yeah. So I kind of can't speak from it from a child's perspective. But I would definitely say, if you think your child is, and you think they're struggling, speak to whoever you have there to speak to, whether it's your health visitor, it depends how old they are. Our health visitor was actually amazing, with so many things that we spoke to her about Oscar. But yes, I would say, speak to your GP, speak to the teacher, speak to the health visitor, whoever you have access to.
And I would echo that, because obviously we do a lot of work with children who are on the spectrum, or who are who could be, is definitely ask the questions. You might not always get the answers you want, and you might not get down the road as far as you'd like to, and it might take a longer time to get a diagnosis, or you might not get a diagnosis. But start having the conversation, and I think
that's the ball rolling.
And raising it with school, just see if they've noticed anything, because if you bring it on school's radar, they'll keep an eye.
Yes, absolutely.
And just look at social interactions, and all of that stuff. And I think it is difficult sometimes to try and give a diagnosis to children when they're very young, because developmentally they've still got
Yeah,
you know, still got
absolutely.
room to move, so it might not be a case of it.
Yeah, and with children, I mean, there's things like walking on the tiptoes that's part of having ASD, but it's also part of a child's development. And so I think as a parent, if you can make notes on your child, write down how often they do certain things, when they do it, at what age did it start, if you know that, when did you kind of realize that something was maybe not quite right. And it's easy to miss as a parent as well. It's so easy to miss as a parent, because every child that you have, even if you have 5 children, they're all different anyway. So picking up on something, and actually being able to pinpoint what that is in a certain child, because all of your children will be different. And if it's your first child, you don't know what they're supposed to be doing and not doing, or what's normal and not normal. So I think as well, it's taking the pressure off of the parents as well. Like I say, a lot of the people that speak to me on Instagram about their children, and they feel like they're an awful parent. I'm like, you're an amazing parent. You can see and you want to do, you don't need to know what it is. That's not your job. You just know that you want to try and help them. I'm like, that's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Jo, did you have anything else you wanted to ask? Because I know your mic was off.
Yes.
Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer to that question.
No, it's good.
There's a couple. One saying, does Google self-diagnosis create a problem where clinical diagnosis helps?
Gosh, I'm terrible for a Google I Google things that I should not be doing, and it makes me worry more.
Google doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. However, I do think with autism, with Tourette's, I mean, Tourette's tends to be a little bit more obvious, but there are things that are part of ASD that can cross over with it, like even some of my tics and things. I'm like, is that a tic as a Tourette tic, or is that one of my like I have like a flicking thing in front of my face, which is one I absolutely hate. I have to sit on my hands. It's so distracting when watching TV, but there's things that cross over, and so it's not always easy to pinpoint. But with anything like this, I think if you open yourself up to receive new information about it, I think that's only a good thing. So I think going on Google and searching and hunting out information and finding some tests and things on there, they're not definitive at all, and they would still have to obviously be diagnosed properly, but they just give you a good idea of what kind of ballpark you're in, what you're looking at, because there are things that you think could be ASD that's actually maybe OCD, or that's dyspraxia. There are so many. There's a huge.
There's such a blend, and I think that even the sensory stuff and it's like the OCD and all those behaviours. They can be something in their own right. They can be connected to something else. They can be.
Yes, that's like. I would say I don't have a problem with Google with this kind of thing. This is how I got to the point I am now, by my sister kind of looking it up and then me looking it up, and I actually know someone who locally who they've just had their child diagnosed. They ended up going privately in the end, but they've kind of known about her differences for a few years now, and that the mum was kind of able to build the case for the child based on what she'd found on Google and all these the research she'd done, basically. So no, I think Google the way, absolutely. Yeah, and also if you're not happy with a doctor's decision, if they're like, no, absolutely have a second opinion, that doesn't mean they don't. But yeah, just kind of, if you still don't feel like it's right, it probably isn't,
trust your instincts, definitely.
Yeah.
And another question came in just about your anxiety, saying, how did you manage anxiety when you were setting the business up on your own, and what were your coping strategies?
So it took me a long time to put coping strategies in place. When I was first setting up the business, I became obsessed. And I mean, a lot of people that don't have businesses are like, oh, you're too obsessed with your business. I don't think you can be too obsessed with your business in terms of the passion and the drive behind it, but there is absolutely a line that you need to set early on. Yeah, personal life, business life. I didn't have that. It really was not healthy, to be honest, when I first started, purely because I think, to be honest, because I fell into it. So I didn't actually have a plan in place, whereas a lot of people be kind of, maybe working through a plan so they know where they're at with it. But for me, it was really full on really quickly. And so what I basically did was, then when I realised that, and when my family were like, you're working like crazy, and like my anxiety was horrific about everything. I just stomped on it straight away, because I was like, do I do like a gentle kind of approach where I just change little things? I was like, nope, I'm having some time off. I need to get my head straight. I am not coping with everything. You know, I actually started the business when I was pregnant. So, you know, there are better times to start.
What a great plan.
I know. I was like, wow, this is a lot.
Haven't got enough on.
No, absolutely. Just moved house, pregnant, started the business.
Growing a human being. I'm going to do a business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there were lots of things that come into play, but I think the main thing for starting a business with anxiety, or having anxieties because you've just started the business, you know, they can kind of come in, you know, in both ways. I think manage your time and schedule time in for your time off, because it's so easy to be like, oh, I'll just work now and then I can get that done, and then I don't have to do that tomorrow.
Especially at the minute as well, where some people will be working from home a lot of the time, and you know, I think when you go to work, if you're going out to work, that's very different to actually being in your work in your home.
Yes, it really is, and that's also a reason in a way for me then being happy to leave the house to go to work when I set up at the new workshop, was because I was like, okay, great, I'm not staring at work all day, it's not always there. So now even at home we have, I make the jewellery in the cabin, we have a cabin in the garden that we built, because I was going to do it in the spare room, and Sam, my partner, was just like, no, because we know what happened before, you couldn't separate it. So I think make time for yourself, start your day, to be honest, start your day right. And even on my busiest days at work, like when I have got too much to do, I will go, pre-lockdown when Oscar was at school, I'd go for a stomp on the beach for half an hour or even 20 minutes, fresh air, just completely refresh myself, wake up, and I'd come back and I'd have a much more productive day than if I'd have just school run straight home in a bit of a flap, you know, trying to get things done. So I think sometimes taking your time with things gets things done quicker, and
yeah, more productive, and you've just got that more headspace, haven't you? So if you otherwise you're on the treadmill and everything. I always think this, when I did my studying, I would be trying to write an essay having looked after children, and you know, got little children at the time, and actually if I just took a break and I went back to it, I could get far more done.
Yeah. Absolutely.
In a much shorter space of time. I was just tired and just couldn't concentrate. You learn, don't you?
More manageable chunks, and I think that's definitely something to help manage the anxiety, and just take it step by step. I think with a business, it's so easy to run away with it and go, 10 paces ahead, but kind of have that in mind so you can grow, but just really focus on what you've got to do now. And I have a list. It's like, what cannot be left from today? What has to be done today? And that's where I start, because I'm very bad at decision making with what to do first, and so have a list of your priorities and just work your way through them.
And that's a good strategy just for general living, isn't it? Just having actually, what do I actually have to do today, and then get that done. And then if you have some time and you can take some time, then you've created time. The other thing as well is, when you were saying about setting up the business, is actually saying no, because I think no.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, everyone who works with me at Fortis will all say, I don't even know how you're saying that, because I never say no to anything. But but there is something about actually knowing where the cutoff point has to be, and like you said, just actually I need to stop, and
definitely.
And no is part of that. And it can be hard to say, I think, because other people don't particularly like it.
Yes, and when you're a bit of a people pleaser like I am, I say yes to things and get myself into a whole situation, because I should have just said no. But you know what? It's not as bad as it feels, really. Once you've said it for the first time, it's like, okay, that didn't feel too bad. It wasn't great, but it's like, okay, I can say it.
Sky didn't fall down.
Yeah, and that's it. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, I'm so glad that I said no to that. And so, yes, absolutely, say no to things. If it doesn't feel right, if you're too busy, just say no, and set your boundaries early. Yeah,
and that sets expectations, yours as well as other people's as well, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. People would rather that you said no than take on too much and not be able to carry it all out. They'd rather wait, if it's whether it's client based or a commission or what have you, that they have to wait for you to be able to work with them. They'd rather wait than you do it and not really do it very well because you're so busy.
So from a self-care point of view, you've talked there about actually the business came out of distraction and probably quite a lot of self-care as well, things that you were enjoying that helped you to feel more connected and grounded, and in the moment, which is what the here and now is, what self-care is really all about, isn't it? Is creating space for that. And what other things do you like to do then in terms of your own self-care? And you know, talked there about walking on the beach, and it sounds like being outside.
Definitely. So for me, anything outside is a winner. It's the exercise is obviously great, your endorphins, it keeps your mood generally, if you can do it regularly, keeps your mood quite stable. And also I think being outside for us, it's pretty much always on the beach. We're fortunate, it's right on our doorstep, we're a street away. So for me, it's the outdoors is not just for the outdoors, it's for everything that comes with it. So it's bombarding your senses, but nicely. So it's like smell, touch, sight, sound. So hearing the waves, or even in the morning, I just take a cup of tea out into the garden, doesn't matter what time of year, bare feet, walk around on the grass, and just focus on what you can hear, which sometimes it's the bin truck, but it's something that's not in your head. You know, it can be anything. Focus how the grass like just feels on your feet. It actually feel that it feels wet, it feels cold, because sometimes we're so uptight and so involved in everything in our head, you don't notice, you know, there's so many things going around you that you just don't notice. And so for me, I think when I can make my senses work, then I'm not thinking, I'm just feeling. And I know that sounds really like hippie like things.
No, but I love that. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, it's great. Like it really is.
For anxiety, especially, using your senses and the five senses, and just that description there, immediately just feel like, okay, that feels like that would be a really nice thing to do. And I know when, you know, I work with people who are really struggling with anxiety, being able to actually ground yourself in the present with all of those aspects of ourselves, it distracts from where the rabbit holes that your head might be going down.
Definitely. I think there's so much power in it. And also you go and do that, or meditate. Like Headspace is a great app that I would recommend. A guy literally tells you what to do for 2 minutes. You know, it's just they take it out of your hands. Like it's great, and it's a really good place to start. And I think after that, you're like, oh, I got through the last 2 minutes, and without worrying, it's like, okay, I can do it. It's really difficult, but I can do it. And I think for me, like my self-care looks different whether I'm anxious, whether I'm overwhelmed, whether I'm stressed, whether I'm down. So when I'm anxious, I actually like to be around people, because the spiral, like you say, the rabbit holes you go down, you know, you're not in this reality. And sometimes when it's anxiety, you just kind of need dragging out of it a little bit, and you realize, oh, actually, this is the real world. People are talking like it's okay. It's not, you know, as bad as it was in my head. And so that's kind of where I go with the anxiety. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, it's very much about just quiet, whether it's yoga. And even for me, sometimes like yoga, I don't follow a class, or I don't do specific poses. Sometimes I just move on my mat in the way that I feel like I need to move. And it's just that downtime and that quiet time that just helps me ground and feel just a bit more settled. Is
that also about connection to breathing as well? Because I mean, yoga obviously is about breath. Meditation's about breath. Is it the movement with breath as well? Is that what helps you?
Yes, definitely. And I think you don't even have to do the movement, you can just do the breathing. And all you have to do is you just put your hand on your chest and on your tummy, and day to day everyone just breathes into the chest.
Shallow.
Yeah, but that makes you even feel more anxious, and keep your chest super still. And it takes ages to actually figure out how to feel this, because you're like, oh my god, I can't even feel my own body breathing. But breathe into your tummy and like push your tummy out as you breathe in, and as you breathe out, suck it right back to your spine. By the time you've figured out how to do it, you've calmed yourself down, because you haven't been thinking about anything.
Distracted.
Yeah, for quite a long time. But then once you've got the breathing technique, it's a really nice technique to do, because you really have to concentrate on it. And
it's something you can do anywhere. So I often say with belly, because that's belly breathing, isn't it? Where it's kind of your diaphragm and you're breathing in. And I mean, I can be in, you know, meetings or about to present, and I think, oh God, I need to see the size of the audience and think, right, okay. But you can literally do it, and providing you don't, you know, it's not too fitted what you're wearing, and it's a little bit obvious. But if you're sat down behind a desk, no one needs to know that you're calming down.
Do it on the train, at the bus stop, literally anywhere. Nobody, I mean, it depends how long they're looking at you for, you know, you might look a bit, but it's really subtle, and it's just such, it's really applicable to so many situations, and it's so easy.
And it's really good. A really good tip is to, when you're doing it with children, is to do it laid down and put a book on their belly.
Okay, so they can see it moving.
Yeah, and if you're both doing that, then there's obviously, you know, it's kind of who can get the book highest and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just a good way of helping them to know which muscles they're using.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like that. I might try that with Oscar actually sometimes. His attention span is not that long though, so how that works.
Get one breath in, it'll be fine.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
There's also, I think, a thing that I go to more because, so basically when we grew up, my mum, she's like the most non-hippie-ish hippie that you'd ever meet, but crystals everywhere. Every time we were stressed or had a cold, she'd be like, put this hematite bracelet on, wear this hematite ring, or put this rose quartz in your top. And so she loves that kind of stuff. And she used to, we used to actually have alternative treatments when we were younger. There were things like, I can't remember what it's actually called, which is bad because I had it for a long time. I think it's craniosychrony.
Yeah.
And that's, again, something that's really cool and something that maybe people might want to explore if they're into that kind of stuff. My dad's like, no, this is not science. That does not work. Everyone's different. But we used to go and we liked it and it worked for us. But something that she was given was a little readout kind of thing that we had that we used to have stuck to our bedside table. And it was like a little nighttime mantra. And it was basically just when it was like, my arms are heavy, and you'd repeat that 3 times. My hands are heavy, 3 times. My solar plexus is calm, and you'd basically just repeat this mantra. But because you'd feel everything, by the time you got to the end, you were asleep anyway, because everything was so heavy. And also that's something you can do in the daytime, because often like people might find that, I find sometimes like I'm tensing my jaw or my hands are just, clasped without me even realizing. And I think, oh, I'm holding so much tension, even without realizing that I am. And sometimes just actually physically releasing it releases it mentally as well. And that's something that's quite a nice practice to be able to do as well.
I think that's a really good idea, because I think that where we hold tension in our muscles, it's that link, isn't it, with what's happening with our emotions and what's happening physiologically. And if often, one of the obvious places is carrying tension in your shoulders.
Shoulders and neck.
Yeah, shoulders up here. And I know mine, they crack when I can, kind of move them to crack the tension. You're like, oh, that's not good. I should have done that before now. But you can literally carry it in your legs and your feet and your hands, and like you said,
pain as well. Like,
yeah,
you have headaches from it. You can actually start to feel unwell. It's not just like a thing that you believe you have. You do. If you carry that tension, you whether you pick up injuries more often, it's really like multi-beneficial. But it all starts from, I think, being aware of how you're feeling. And sometimes in life we're just so busy, we don't have the time to even think, how do I feel, because there's just so much going on. I think that's my starting point always, is how do I feel? Like, actually check in with myself, like, how am I feeling? And kind of making the reminders, if you like, to actually do that. But it sounds stupid and sounds daft. It should be the most obvious thing, but life is busy. There are so many things going on and so many distractions. I think just taking the time to check in with yourself and give yourself like a once over. Like, am I okay? Have I been really tired recently? Like, have I had more headaches? Why?
Am I eating more? Am I drinking more caffeine? Eating more sugar? Going for more salt? What am I doing?
Absolutely, because that's absolutely the easiest way to solve anything for me. I'm like, a really sugary cup of tea and a chocolate bar. I'm like, I'm good. And it's
Duracell straight off.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's just not the way to go. And you crash, and you're like, oh, that was not a good idea.
No, and I absolutely agree with that. I think that we did. Joe put something out the other day about how are you really, and I think we often encourage this. There was big campaigns about ask twice when you're asking somebody how they are, but I also think we need to do it to ourselves sometimes, because we can kind of think, oh, I'm fine, but actually to engage with not being fine can be quite tricky, because you might feel like, well, I can't afford to not be okay.
And it's like, if I think about it too much, then I'm not going to have to deal with it. Okay, but it's like, actually, if you keep on putting that lid on it, it's going to explode. And I used to be terrible for bottling things up as a child. This was also like with the ASD that we hadn't known about. Mum used to say, she always used to have to like hold me so tight. She used to have to squeeze me because I would get so overwhelmed, and there was just so much that's just processed, like as a sensory kind of thing. And she literally just had to grip onto me so tight until I was okay again. And that's something I think that you have to give yourself like a mental squeeze sometimes, and just feel safe and feel like you can feel the feelings. And sometimes it's totally okay to not know how you feel. Like, sometimes I don't know how I feel. I know that I'm not feeling great. But as you start to kind of unpick it a little bit more, you get better at acknowledging.
And it's okay to also not be okay, you know, to actually be able to, you know, there's a psychologist whose name I cannot remember, but he talks about hippo time, you know, so like wallowing a bit, like give yourself permission to actually wallow in feeling a bit crap.
Definitely. Yeah.
And that just don't stay there, don't allow yourself to stay there, actually kind of make that, and it is hard effort, as you said, if you're feeling like everything feels quite dark and you know, mood is really low and all of that, it can feel like an absolute, you know, massive task to actually do something, but
even to get up and start.
Yeah, exactly. But just doing that is an achievement. But it's okay to actually also be like, do you know what, I just don't feel okay at the minute.
And I think sometimes there's a thing that's like a toxic positivity as well, which is they're very much like, it's fine, it could be worse, like someone's in a much worse situation, or it's like, oh, this happened, but it's fine. And it's like, it's good if you need to be productive and get through it, and being positive it's always good, but sometimes you don't need to be positive straight away, because sometimes it does hurt and it is hard, and you kind of just have to sit with those feelings sometimes for a little bit and just acknowledge it as well, and then you can kind of move on with the positivity
and recover from it.
Absolutely.
I mean, at that time has absolutely flown by, Katie.
I told you I really do ramble.
Not at all. Thanks ever so much for coming in to talk to us. I know that there'll be loads of people who can relate to what you're saying, and I think you'll probably end up with people contacting you, you know, to talk to you about a bit further if you're okay with that.
Honestly, go for it. People message me about it all the time. I'm more than happy to talk about it.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Salt and Silver Jewellery, people can follow you everywhere. I understand you're on every platform.
Instagram, Facebook, and the website, and then my personal page is the Salt Journal, which Joe's tagged on a few things. So generally for this kind of stuff, if you do my personal page, because then if I'm off from work, I'll always pick up the messages. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Okay, that's fab. Thanks ever so much. Thanks everyone for coming along and listening and watching and taking part. We'll be back here next week at 7:30, so we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks everybody. Bye.